Hello, and thank you so much, GAconf, for having me once again, and this time with a new special guest. I am Cari.
And I'm Scott, and we are partners in crime who make games in our spare time. This is our micro talk, baking audio navigation into level design.
So this talk is pre-recorded, so please fire away your questions in the Discord and we'll get to answer them as we go. So first of all, a little bit of an introduction about us. So I am an accessibility designer who used to do UI and UX in a previous life.
And I'm a graduate level designer with a knowledge of a lot of development processes. I graduated from Abate last year and just been putting my practice into several other projects.
And together we make games. We make board games and digital games, mostly for game jams. It's a way for us to innovate and practice new things and create something together.
There's a visual joke here on the screen. We've taken our photo together and added features of the Swedish chef from the Muppets. So I'm wearing a chef hat and a pink bow, and Carrie has a big round nose and a very suave moustache.
So in January, Scott and I participated in the Global Game Jam 2024, and we produced Blind Bake, which is a little prototype which won ReadSpeaker's Accessibility Award, which was really great. To showcase a little bit more about it before we get into the talk, here is a short trailer that we prepared earlier.
Could you play a game blind? This is Blind Bake, a small game prototype made for Global Game Jam 2024 which showcases audio navigation using sound to navigate levels. Up to 2 players cooperate to escape the bakery. 1 player deploys chorusing confections to help guide the croissant, who can't see the game, using only sound, and to sweet freedom. At your disposal are meeping marshmallows, which create a pinging sound. Jam, which changes your footsteps to something more sticky. And Battenbergs, which speak custom text.
Jump when you hear jam.
Play co-op, with a blind or blindfolded player as the croissant, or solo through blind accessible mode, which omits the build phase and uses pre-placed minions. Blind Bake is brought to life with menu narration and text-to-speech using ReadSpeaker, and hopes to teach players about guiding gamers without sight through audio.
So we made a game that hopes to teach players about audio navigation in levels through cooperative play, but why did we do this? So I've worked on a few projects and mentoring students for blind and low vision accessibility in their projects, and I think that there's more to making a game accessible for blind and low vision players than just adding menu narration. And one of the key parts of that was looking at the gameplay and how to make that accessible. One of the sources for inspiration for this was Scott and I played We Were Here, which is a little co-op game. It's kind of like escape room style. And there's one part in one of the games where one player is looking at a level from above, and they can see things like bridges or things like hazards, and the other player can't see these bridges from where they are, so they're invisible. So you're having to communicate with each other in real time to be like, go forward, stop, turn left, turn right. And it was a really cute little mechanic, and we were talking about wanting to do something for Global Game Jam that was cooperative like that and had this communication and had this kind of guiding element.
As mentioned earlier, I am a level designer, and we thought this would be a good project to fold our strengths together, both level design and accessibility. So I would say that level design already has a lot of accessibility considerations baked in, such as the width of corridors, how wide doorways are, but also simply just guiding the player to certain goals. So the question here really is, how do you take that step further and guide players using only sound and not using visuals at all? A key aspect of this was accessibility by design. We wanted to bake in the good practices by default. This meant never including an option to change the levels based on your vision. The only difference between multiplayer and single player are whether or not you're playing with developer-placed beacons, or you're allowing your friends to chaotically guide you through the levels.
So the game is about using audio beacons, or minions as we call them, and they are deployed by one player, and then another player will use them to navigate the level. So let's take a closer look at each of the minions. The first one that we have is the marshmallow. It's a little marshmallow character that makes a meeping noise. It's attenuated in a cone shape, so we've kind of got like this half circle shape, which did originally begin life as a sphere, but what we found when we initially play tested the early builds is that we would just walk past, and then because we heard it behind behind us, we would start going back towards it. So we created this cone shape so there was a clear cutoff, and then you could overlap it with the next one in the chain, and you'd be able to like follow them. As of a recent update, there are different sizes of this marshmallow now as well. So there's like a really big one and a medium and a small one. And this is kind of the key ingredient of most of the audio navigation. So this is the most similar to something like you'd find in the God of War or the Jedi audio navigation, on a much more basic level, but it's kind of similar to that in terms of the ping system that you would hear. The next one is the Battenberg, which is a little custom TTS input. So this is something where you type in anything that you want and the Battenberg will speak it back using ReadSpeaker. We've got a cute little voice that I think was used for Stories of Blossom, which is really cute. And we've got a couple different shapes for activating as well. So we've got like a circle, a square, and then we have a rectangle that goes the full width of most of the corridors in the games. Originally, this began life as the Screaming Strawberry. We had meeping marshmallows and screaming strawberries. But strawberries are quite difficult to model, and because it's just Scott and I, we don't actually have a 3D artist among us. We just have Scott. So we decided that a cube would probably be easier to do, and we turned it into the Battenberg, which is kind of a staple of GAconf. Our last beacon is Jam. So this is something where you put down a big spill of jam, and when the character walks over it, it changes the footstep sounds to a squelching sound. So this is the only one that utilizes existing audio. So you have these footstep sounds, and then it changes when you're on jam. And the idea is to kind of mimic tactile paving. So in a lot of the dev levels, we kind of use this to signify when you need to jump, for example. Our player character is the croissant, which can move and jump, which is kind of like a baseline moveset of a lot of games, and it has a looping footstep sound as well. And then the only other thing that we have in the game, which isn't a deployable beacon, is a macaron. So this is a little collectible that we use for opening doors in later levels, and it plays a constant sparkling sound, which can be heard in a range. And the idea is to introduce non-linear level navigation. So the idea that you might have a level where the player needs to go and collect these items, and they're off of the path between them and the door.
So with the levels, we wanted to go really simple. The challenge of the gameplay wasn't to explore a maze-like level, it was to have one player guide the second player, and therefore that's the key concept for the game. So we start off with the first level. It's just a straight corridor. This teaches player one how to put down beacons, and player two can hold forward and win. And then we harshly ramp up the difficulty by making the turn left. So after you've mastered the act of walking forwards and turning left, the next natural leap is to learn how to jump. And so this level had 3 jumps in a row in a sort of step pattern. So you jump up one and then immediately jump and then immediately jump again. This is good in theory because it reinforces the jump mechanic. However, some changes needed to be made, which we'll get to in the future. So next up, we are reinforcing the jump mechanic by just adding a bit more consequence. So instead of having them jump over a pit of sharks, it's just a dead end, and the players need to navigate back. And this also gives the player one a bit more challenge in how to place their beacons to lead the player back again without having too many beacons overlapping and just overloading the croissant. So level 5 introduced a skinny beam across a pit. This introduced the need for precise controls and trying to guide the player to a very specific location in the map. Again, there are no consequences for failing, but it's just more how do you guide the player back to the start again to then get them to try again if they fail. And finally, we're introducing the macaron. I went back to the basics again. Basically, it's a long straight corridor with a little cutout on the left, and it sparkles, so the player will need to walk forwards. They'll find out that the door is locked and they need the macaron, so they have to go into the nook and then go back to the door again. It's very simple, but again, the gameplay isn't exploring a maze-like level, it's just navigate the player. So some of the key features for accessible level design, one of the first main ones is rounding corners. Right-angled corners are generally bad. It's not so bad if it's on the inside, but if it's on an outside corner and they could get lodged in the corner and stuck, that's probably bad. So I like to introduce helpful invisible walls in those cases. So I'm not a 3D artist, and making a rounded corner was hard. So everything is right-angled, but I use these invisible walls sort of smooth out the curve, so if a player is holding forwards, they will naturally walk around the corner. Same thing for the doors. There are hard edges or hard corners on both sides of the door, but again, using invisible walls to funnel them into the door. So it's important for us to include safety and catch areas. This was a light-hearted, fun game. We didn't want people failing the levels necessarily or dying. That's bad. And so we have these areas where the players just need to walk back to the start. But again, this is all just reinforcing the audio beacons and the need for guiding the player properly. So one of the key things I wanted for this game was to avoid useless areas. So one of my favorite games is Minecraft Dungeons, but I found it incredibly frustrating and fatiguing when I would explore these multiple pathways and there wouldn't be anything at the end of it. Usually it would be a little decorative camp or something. And so if this game, we're keeping it simple. If there's a macron in a level, we just keep it off to the side a little bit. So I just wanted to make sure that if we were going to have exploration, there's a little something something at the end of it. So after the game jam was all been and done and we caught up on our sleep again, we got some feedback on some gamers without sight, and this led to some feedback, the first being progression cues on the multi-jump level, which was level 3. So the key thing was not having several jams in a row. If you jumped from one to the next, your footstep would stay the same, and it wasn't clear if you made the jump to begin with. And so naturally, we had to spread out the level to have still include the multiple jumps for reinforcement, but just spread them out a bit more. So we would have one jump onto the table, you would land, there would be a little Battenberg telling you, good job, you made it, and then you would do it again, and then you would complete the level. It gets the same goal, it's just slightly more spread out.
One of the other pieces of feedback that we got was on some of the language that we'd used in the dev level, particularly when we've written stuff for the Battenbergs, to say some of the language for the jumps that you could fail and you could land into these little like catchment areas. The Battenbergs would say, "You've fallen," and that was great contextually if you'd fallen into it, but if you'd come out and walked back into the Battenberg and it said that you'd fallen again, that's the only feedback that Play Without Sight is getting. So now they're confused as to how they've fallen a second time. So we changed this to be things like you are below the beam or you are below the ledge. Try and get back around to the front. There were a couple of other little things as well, like setting context. We didn't have any context initially for the beam to say there is a narrow beam ahead and the challenge is to get across it. So it was writing that kind of context that would help to give players without sight a better chance at being able to navigate the level effectively.
So when I created the beam level, I wanted to have a margin of error. It would have been very easy to just stick a one wide beam and have the player try go across it, but I wanted to have a little bit thicker for the players. This was good in practice. However, what we found through playtesting was it needed to be a lot wider.
We don't have any kind of assistance mechanics that would help keep people on track, so something a bit more manual was kind of needed for this. Some of the other changes that we made, so we introduced some little fences so that the player couldn't fall back on themselves, because once they've completed the beam, that's the point of that level. We don't want them to end up going backwards and falling off the edge and having to do it again. And we also, one of the reasons for widening it was we saw people use the jam as like a runway kind of strat, so they would layer up jam and get people try and follow them. So because the beam was wider, it meant that we would be able to hear footsteps changing to be not jam when you were outside of that kind of narrow runway.
To summarize, here are some tips we found for baking audio navigation into your level designs. So first of all, give context to the player of what's in front of them. What they don't hear can't help them. Secondly, you want to establish core paths and think about how audio markers would be plotted along those paths. You never want to leave the player in the dark. It would be like someone turning off your monitor halfway through a level and expecting you to know exactly where you are. Next, you want to create an audio language for key objects. So in our example, we have a sparking macaron, but the key thing is if you've got a collectible or something, give it a distinct sound. And next up, you can utilize or modify existing audio, so changing footstep sounds to notify of danger or an obstacle in the player's way. And finally, you want to keep it consistent. Once you've established a rule early on, don't go changing it halfway through because the players won't know what it means.
Thank you so much for listening to our micro talk. We hope you found it helpful. We're going to be posting links to our socials and to the version of the build in the chat in the Discord now.
Thank you very much for listening to me ramble on, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your GAconf.
Thank you.